Yeah, baby. It's episode 20 of The Whiners on February 6th, 2025. Jeff Norman and Ryan Milton with you as we are every Thursday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And tonight we are pleased as punch to have as our special guest for the second time in only 20 episodes, already a return guest, Matt Hoh, Marine veteran, former State Department officer, and the Associate Director of the Eisenhower Media Network. How you doing, Matt?
Good, guys. Thank you for having me back on.
Five-star Eisenhower Media Network. That's all I think about. Awesome.
Yeah.
Leadership.
Is that our Yelp rating?
No, that was Eisenhower, General of the Army, and I think it has.
Yeah, he was a five-star general, and your group is a five-star organization.
Five-star organization. That's my rating.
Well, that's right.
This is not a five-star wine, by the way. This is what I'm drinking tonight. $6.99 at Trader Joe's, a French blend. I never even heard of that third grape, and tonight is night 2 of it. I opened it last night, and I was so bored with it last night. It wasn't an offensive taste. It was just boring. Boring. And I was all set to say, don't buy this. But you know what? On night 2, it's not too bad. That's the way it goes sometimes. What are you drinking, Ryan?
Really? Well, I was going to get a bad bottle of wine, but I didn't. I got this 2019 Padrone from Signorello Estates. Now, Pat, as you know, works and has worked from the beginning for Bobby Kennedy. So she was recommended this wine, which has 95, 96 points by all of these great people, accolades up the wazoo with all of these different mixtures in this Cabernet Sauvignon. She got it for under $200, but this one goes for about $225, $250. Wow. So we're celebrating because also she is very happy that Bobby Kennedy will be heading up Health and Human Services. So even though we both did get the COVID vaccine, we are still alive and drinking wine. So.
All right. Well, I guess it's a special occasion. Isn't it nice to be rich? Matt, I know you don't drink wine, but if you did, I bet you wouldn't be spending $200.
No, I'm feeling. I drink occasionally, but no, I really am. Realize I'm sitting here with a cup of instant coffee. So that's I really feel like I'm not representing myself or my brand or my five-star organization well.
Don't.
Well, wait a second. Maybe you tore open an MRE bag and there was instant coffee in the bag, and so then you're going to drink some Tabasco afterwards.
Yeah, right. To be fair to myself, it is organic instant coffee, so it is a bit highbrow in that sense. But no, it's not as good as the. I forget what kind of coffee. It was a Taster's Choice or Maxwell House or Folgers. Yeah, people that Ryan, if you're not familiar with what Ryan's talking about, within your meals ready to eat, your packaged food we'd eat in the military. You'd heat it with water, you'd heat tab and everything else, and all kinds of different flavors. But you always had a little packet of coffee along with salt and a napkin and a fork, and one of the most prized possessions you could have was that little bottle of Tabasco sauce.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, whatever floats your boat. We don't believe in peer pressure here, so don't worry about a thing.
That's right. That's all right. But just know that if you come and visit, you'll be taken good care of.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, very impressed. But I feel like there's a good, difference here, right? You've got Trader Joe's and you've got a $250 bottle of, so you got good representation here.
It's a DEI podcast.
Yeah.
That's right.
Diversity, economic diversity. All right. So earlier, what was it, a couple of days ago now, 3 days ago? I don't know. I can't keep track of anything. Our beloved president, former reality TV star, real estate developer, current chief executive of the United States of America, held a press conference with Netanyahu, and it was a doozy. And I have been watching you closely, Matt. I saw what you said. I heard what you said on Judge Knapp's show. You described it I don't want to misquote you, so let me know if I have this right. The most consequential press conference in the history of press conferences, something like that?
I hope I qualified it with possibly or maybe,
Possibly,
maybe.
okay.
You know, I mean, but it's serious in that, in the sense that if and his aides, his people, of course, his apologists and the pundits and whatnot are all walking it back in the sense of what he said. But the president of the United States did deliver a written address flanked by the Israeli prime minister, where he said the United States would take over or take control of Gaza. We would take it over. We would facilitate the ethnic cleansing, which would drive out more than 2 million people. We would rebuild it, and then we would provide it to the people of the area. He didn't say we'd have the Palestinians come back, but he basically standing there saying the people of the area, referencing Benjamin Netanyahu next to him, right? So we are gonna facilitate greater Israel. And then when he was asked, does this mean you use troops? Because how else are you going to get these people out? He said, we'll do whatever's necessary, whatever it takes. So the idea of the United States putting ground forces into Palestine to ethnically cleanse 2 million people, what that would entail, what it means. I mean, this is a quite possibly more significant than anything else we've seen this century in terms of the possibility of what it would bring. And I think this is one of those things, guys, right, that people have been talking about, in the sense of how will history view this last year and a half with regards to Palestine, Israel, the entire region. And, some folks have been saying, myself included, that, this may only be the opening chapter. This may only be the prologue, right? And the example I give is the 1912-1913 Balkans War, which was atrocious, which was filled with what we would now call crimes against humanity. Million and a half people were killed in it. The world was horrified by it. And in 1914, and the Great War came, right? And now who's heard about the 1912-1913 Balkans War? By the time, people couldn't imagine anything worse or anything bigger. And then what comes following that, of course, is, right, the great cataclysm of the First World War, which then is surpassed again within a generation's time, or outside of a generation. Yeah. So.
Yeah, you mentioned that it was a written address, and that sort of was noticeable. I mean, now that we mentioned it, I want to play a clip, and it'll be
it was noticeable.
Noticeable once you point out, but I don't. That's noteworthy because nowadays Trump, he has a teleprompter, but he seems to ignore it almost all the time. So this suggests whether or not it was a negotiating ploy or whether or not he meant it. He certainly meant to make sure that his words were exact, were very planned. So let's take a look at a clip here.
I strongly believe that the Gaza Strip, which has been a symbol of death and destruction for so many decades, and so bad for the people anywhere near it, and especially those who live there, and frankly, who's been really very unlucky. It's been very unlucky. It's been an unlucky place for a long time. Being in its presence just has not been good. And it should not go through a process of rebuilding and occupation by the same people that have really stood there and fought for it and lived there and died there and lived a miserable existence there. Instead, we should go to other countries of interest with humanitarian hearts, and there are many of them that want to do this, and build various domains that will ultimately be occupied by the 1.8 million Palestinians living in Gaza, ending the death and destruction and, frankly, bad luck.
Bad luck. That's an interesting choice of words.
Right.
Well, he focused on that lucky question. I mean, first of all, everything that you just said, Matt, and what Trump himself said, it made me think, okay, so now Gaza is actually going to become the 51st state. That was the kind of humorously, that was what came into my mind, or dark humor maybe.
Right.
But then I also thought about the way he was saying things. I actually, you might play the next clip before I make my next comment, because I think he says something in particular that got my attention on this.
All right.
Do you have it there?
Let's take a look at it.
This can be paid for by neighboring countries of great wealth. It could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 12. It could be numerous sites, or it could be one large site. But the people will be able to live in comfort and peace, and we'll make sure something really spectacular is done. They're going to have peace. They're not going to be shot at and killed and destroyed like this civilization of wonderful people has had to endure. The only reason the Palestinians want to go back to Gaza is they have no alternative. It's right now a demolition site. This is just a demolition site. Virtually every building is down. They're living under fallen concrete that's very dangerous and very precarious. They instead can occupy all of a beautiful area with homes and safety, and they can live out their lives in peace and harmony instead of having to go back and do it again.
So, okay, it's not quite here at this stage, but first of all, he is, as others have said, he does sound like he's talking about a real estate development program, and I think later he also says, after painting quite a beautiful picture of developing the area, of course he doesn't exactly say which people would live there. He does say, and just don't ever come back. And I'm trying to think, since I saw that, where is this coming from? Yes, he's a New York real estate tycoon, but of course we know Donald Trump from many other things where he's North Korea, he's tough, and then he negotiates, as some have said, maybe this is just negotiation. That comes from, historically with him, his mentor in this realm, Roy Cohn, I think. I'm sure you remember him historically, and if our audience doesn't know who the attorney was, he was also Joe McCarthy's right-hand man during the McCarthy hearings, but he was Trump's lawyer when Trump was a very young man starting out in this field. And, I mean, this was also his approach to things, kind of a mafia-style thing. Hey, look, all these good things. What do you think about that?
Oh, well, first of all, Ryan, it makes me think about how history is always much closer to us than we feel or we believe, right? So McCarthy hearings were 70 years ago, and here you have that connection, right? The President of the United States, his attorney starting out was the guy who was advising Joe McCarthy. I had an experience when I was in the Pentagon, 20-some years ago, and standing at this event. I was a Marine Corps captain. My friend who's a Naval lieutenant. We're junior officers, and we're at this thing, and Don Rumsfeld comes up to us. And Ashley and I, we have been standing in front of a portrait of General Eisenhower. And Secretary Rumsfeld says to us, "You know how old I am? I knew that guy, or I worked with that guy." He's saying, "I knew him. I worked with that guy. That's how old I am." Right? I mean, and then you think about that too, where Eisenhower, when he was a young man, would have known Civil War officers.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, so the history is never as far from us as we think it is. And
Precisely.
So in Trump's experience, the things that he was being imparted to, that the things that were being taught to him by Roy Cohn were things that Cohn had learned himself going through things such as the McCarthy hearings, seeing the rise and then the total bursting or the flame out of Joe McCarthy. That would have had a huge impact in Cohn, right? And so can you imagine the things that he then informs Donald Trump of, what he teaches him and what Trump takes from that? So this is why we study history. This is why we learn history, right? This is why it's important, is because it's really not that far away. And people who are making incredibly important decisions, like President Trump, and how he's choosing to act, is informed by that. The other aspect, too, is this is one area, one of many areas, right, where we see the real difference between the first Trump administration and the second Trump administration in terms of the preparation, the awareness, the interests, the goals that were formulated in those intervening 4 years, right? So you have this idea that Trump, I believe, really has thought quite a bit about Palestine and Israel over the last several years. I believe he probably has had briefings and meetings, many of them donor based, right? But certainly to understand it in the perspective that his donors want him to. So when he talks about Palestine, the way he massacres the language all around it, but he's sharing his understanding, his view, the context he understands the situation to be a part of. So you see how his worldview, he probably really does think in some way, if it's possible for him to be like this, that he is carrying out a humanitarian effort, that he is doing the right thing, that this is out of the box thinking. And certainly people have been following those last couple of days. You've seen those are the two talking points, that whether it's the Secretary of Defense, the White House spokesperson, members of Congress, they're all emphasizing Donald Trump's out of the box thinking when it comes to this, and that it's all based upon humanitarian reasons, right? We're doing this to help the Palestinians. We are going to give them the life they couldn't have because they were betrayed by their own people, by Hamas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I mean, just in like that type of thing, I think it's important to understand it, or to look at it that way, because it helps us better understand what we can expect from this administration going forward.
So that brings up another question, though, in terms of something you just said that triggered in my head in terms of the history. You said Trump does think that he might be doing something good. I mean, the other question I have is, have other governments put out proposals for the region that are a solution beyond? And okay, yes, I know two-state solution or one state with two different people, but it's obviously more than just that. There's something bigger that has to happen. He's not wrong. The whole place has to be rebuilt.
Right.
So, and he may not actually be planning to do this. I don't know, Matt, if you heard what our friend Scott Ritter has said in a couple of podcasts over the last couple of days, but let me just summarize it for you and see what you think about it. He's saying that he doesn't really intend to do this. He's embarrassing Netanyahu on purpose, and he's emphasizing how he has failed to come up with a solution, and by throwing this crazy idea out there, he is trying to prompt others to then come back with a counter proposal.
Right. There's certainly those aspects of it, right, where you could see that happen. This is a negotiating ploy where he's putting out the worst case scenario for others out there, so that, say, King Abdullah of Jordan or General Sisi of Egypt or whoever has to make a counter proposal. And then, and actually there's an Israeli term for this, something, what's it called?
Not Hasbara.
No,
that's
their public information propaganda campaign.
Yeah.
But it's called. They'll come to me in a moment. Anyway, it's this
idea. Don't be a schmuck. Is that it?
Yeah, it's offering something as coming in hard on a negotiation, offering something that is just absolutely not acceptable, and then pulling it away, and you're seen as you're making a concession. So that could be possibly it as well. The way it's being walked back, I think he was pretty serious about this. This just the way that you heard various people the last couple of days on his team saying, well, he didn't commit to troops. It's not this. We're not going to fund any of it. That's not what you take from what he's reading. Now, we also don't know the genesis of this. The day after, so on Tuesday, the reports where the Israelis were claiming credit, that this was Ron Dermer's idea, Dermer being one of the chief aides to Netanyahu, that Ron Dermer this was his idea. And then I heard today, no, Trump made this up a couple hours ahead of time, and most of his people didn't even know, including his chief of staff.
Well, that's so interesting, because a lot of folks are saying, I mean, I don't know, I'm not any body language expert, but a lot of folks are saying that Netanyahu looked surprised. He looked nervous.
Right. And yeah. So, I mean, what does this all mean? What's he trying to get out of it? The one thing it's clear is that Israel has his support. And however it comes to pass, whatever it looks like, there's going to be no diminishment of support for Israel, and certainly no support for the Palestinians. You can see this in some of their actions. When Steve Witkoff, his Middle East envoy, was in the region last week, he refused to go to Ramallah to meet with the Palestinian Authority. He had them fly, or actually he met with one of their folks who's outside of Palestine in Riyadh. right? I mean, so the Palestinians have very little agency, very little voice, very little role in this. They are just simply nothing more than look. This goes back to Thucydides, right? The strong will do as they want. The weak will suffer as they must, and that's the situation of the Palestinians. And I also too, I want to make sure I put an asterisk or a caveat on something I said earlier when I said Trump may see himself as doing something good, right? In the sense that doesn't mean he's empathetic. That doesn't mean he actually wants to help the Palestinian people. I think probably the dominant.
He wants to win, and he wants to look like he's winning. And if they benefit from it, that's a side effect.
I think the best way to look at it is a real estate example where he wants to purchase a piece of property. There's a low income neighborhood there, Section 8 housing, whatever, and he's going to give these people vouchers to move out, right? I think that's the way he probably looks at this, way he's probably assessing it, how he feels about the Palestinians. And he really does think he's being well-intentioned. But there's the other side of it, too, where he understands that, one, he is paying back his benefactors. You know, after Elon Musk, Miriam Adelson, who, from my understanding, was there in that room during that press conference, she was his second biggest campaign contributor, $100 million this year. Her and her husband gave $50 million in 2016. I'm not sure what they gave in 2020, but you can imagine probably a lot. So, you know, you see his willingness to pay back those who've given to
Well, do you
him.
think she actually wants or even has ever thought about the U.S. owning the Gaza Strip?
I don't
that's
think
what he
anyone's
said.
ever thought about that. I mean, that is, I mean,
That's
to tell
out
you what,
there.
If anyone runs into anyone out there saying, "Oh, I knew this was going to happen," that person is just absolutely right. Yeah.
All right, well, let's take a look at another clip where Trump flat out says that this is about the U.S. owning.
We'll take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area. Do a real job, do something different. Just can't go back. If you go back, it's going to end up the same way it has for 100 years.
He throws in these little asides to make it seem like he's not reading. You know, do a real job, do a real job. But he's reading.
I don't think I've ever seen him read like that before. Like looking straight down at the paper. I mean, clearly reading it, which may show too that he doesn't know it that well. That it was something that came up with 2 hours before. I don't know. Yeah. And this is the problem we have. We're talking about the United States possibly sending troops overseas to take part in expanding Israel, meeting the needs, the goals, the ambition of the Zionist cause, right? Getting into another Iraq war, essentially, ethnically cleansing a population. And it's so vague what's going on here. It's so obtuse that we're trying to divine from body language. I feel at least 20 some odd years ago when the Bush-Cheney administration was doing this, they at least were clearer, right, and straightforward, and you had a good idea of what they actually intended. Everyone knew by at least summer of 2002 that we were invading Iraq, right? I mean, it was clear. It's just a matter of time. They're going to go.
You saw the directionality. This was definitely out of nowhere. But again, going back to something you're saying, paving the way for Zionist state of Israel, Eretz Israel. I mean, it does come back, though. I keep thinking about why did Trump post Jeffrey Sachs's calling him a son of a bitch, right. Because Trump has said now, going back many years, the one that didn't want peace was Benjamin Netanyahu. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, and we saw one of the comments that was posted saying that Trump hates Netanyahu.
No, there's been multiple of those comments in the chat for sure.
Yeah. You think that's true, Matt?
I think,
hate may be too strong a word, but I guess he's not particularly
like him. Doesn't see any need to have Netanyahu there in power for his interests. I think that's part of a lot of this. Is Trump is an emperor. He is the head of the American empire. He views the empire differently than his predecessors did. He doesn't view it in the same static traditional terms, but he views it in a more dynamic sense of that things need to shift. Again, like from a real estate perspective, you move out of some markets, you move into other markets. So not a great return on investment in Europe. So let's move out of Europe and move into the Americas kind of thing.
Well,
right?
except Ukraine's got a lot of good.
Or supposedly, which a good percentage of those rare earth minerals that Lindsey Graham likes to talk about are under control of the Russians now.
Well, that's in the other areas, yeah. And then the 100-day plan. I guess there's a new version of the peace proposal which says that Zelensky will, just not try to take those lands back. They won't go into NATO. But the Russians will allow European troops to line the new border. But then he says this thing about the rare earths, but they won't have that. They got some of it.
They've got some of it. It's not all of it's under Russian control. It's disputed how much, but yeah, no, Zelensky. This is Ukraine is something that is one thing that the Trump administration, we do need to support them if they are truly moving forward and trying to get a negotiated settlement. I'm afraid the negotiations will look like the way Americans often approach negotiations, and essentially our preconditions are what the outcomes need to be. Essentially telling the Russians that this is the deal, and then the war continues to go on. But I just want to get back to Trump and Netanyahu. I think what Trump may possibly prefer is somebody like Benny Gantz or someone who is reliable, dependable, is going to be a good ally to the Americans in the sense of not superseding, not getting ahead of, not having us have to fix things or make up for things or apologize for things, not because Trump is an internationalist and he cares about what the rest of the world thinks, but because I don't think he wants someone else coming before him. I don't think Trump wants another leader of the in the world coming to the American Congress and getting 55 standing ovations, right? I mean, that was the message over the summer. The one person in the world who can unite the American Congress, who can get them not to just give him 55 standing ovations, but kiss his ring, is Benjamin Netanyahu. Trump can't do that, right?
He pushed in his chair. Yes.
So I think
everybody's analyzing every little maneuver.
We're trying.
For all I know, Trump pulls the chair out for any visiting leader. I don't know. Maybe he does.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Sure. People like to focus on
it's. I was gonna say, with Netanyahu and Trump, they are cut from the same cloth. So you can see how, and this is, I think, one of the issues you're going to have with Musk and Trump. People have been saying this. How long can these guys be friends for before they run into each other? Run into conflict with each other. So, yeah.
All right, well, maybe Jose Vega has an idea about what should be done. Jose and Matt have something in common. For those of you who don't know, I would like to point out what that is.
And the mustache.
Matt, it would take all day to go through all of Matt's credits, so I didn't mention it at the top. But Matt is also a former Green Party United States Senate candidate in the great state of North Carolina. And Jose was a congressional candidate, and I'm hearing rumors that he's going to be a candidate again. And I don't think Matt has ever done an intervention, but there is some common ground between you two gents.
Yeah. Hi. It's great to be with you, Matt.
Hey, good to see you, Jose.
Yeah. From talking on the phone to talking on our show. Welcome. Or no, I'm coming.
Happy to be here. I'm very happy to be here. Yeah.
So we've been analyzing the press conference and raising our eyebrows at what our real estate developer president has proposed, suggesting that maybe the idea is to prompt others to come up with some other ideas, a counter proposal, so to speak. Anything on your mind that might work? Like if you were, say, the president of some country or other, what might you propose?
Well, I think the entire region needs to be developed. I mean, you're not just talking about Gaza, but, you have Lebanon as well and Jordan. I mean, Lebanon has to be redeveloped as well, although Gaza, of course, right now is like the worst of it all. I think the thing to do is you need to have a coordinated international project in Gaza, but that centers around connecting it with the region, basically building it back up from the ground up. But it can't just be one country saying we're going to take responsibility for it, like the United States. Because first of all, no one trusts the United States, nor should they. But I think if you had a project where you had 3 or 4 countries, and I think if South Africa was one of the main people spearheading this, as well as sorry. Let me finish this thought and then I'll come right back. This is an emergency because a friend of ours in your great state, Matt, Boris Johnson was just there. And I heard that somebody may have just done something. And actually, I should probably...
Well, let's finish the conversation. It's not an emergency.
Well, it was, okay. Hopefully they didn't get arrested. My point is that we need to have South Africa, China, Russia leading the pack, leading the charge. And with the U.S., of course, and other countries being involved in this development project where it all has to center around Gaza, connecting it with Jordan, with Lebanon. And this is the only way you can actually begin a real redevelopment program.
Why South Africa?
Well, because South Africa led the charge against Israel at the ICJ. And I think that that's one country that has a high reputation around the international community with not just the people of Gaza, but it's something that could be trusted by all kinds of allied countries of Palestine to say, we'll be involved with the reconstruction of Gaza. But this also doesn't have to involve pushing people out either. I mean, you think about it, Gaza is only like, the size of Staten Island, I believe. It's only like 26 miles long. For those who run marathons, you could run a marathon in Gaza and you would have crossed. There you go, Ryan. You would have crossed it all, yeah.
What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, certainly there needs to be, I guess we'll wave the magic wand and say that genocide and ethnic cleansing and everything else, right, is put away. But yeah, I mean, the response certainly needs to be an international one to rebuild it. It, of course, needs to be led and owned by the Palestinians themselves, right, of course. But how do you get the support in there to rebuild it with the magnitude of what we're seeing? I mean, the reports coming from these different organizations, these institutions, agencies, it's going to take years upon years just to remove the rubble. But the one thing I saw is the housing situation where hundreds of thousands of housing units have been destroyed or damaged. 2040 is when they're going to, is how long it's going to take to rebuild just the housing. So, I mean, this idea of like...
You were there when? In November, Matt? You were in Palestine?
Well, I was in Palestine. I was in the West Bank in November. We did go down to the Gaza border, and we were able to see into the northern parts of Gaza, so Beit Hanun, Beit Lahia, Jabalia refugee camp. We were able to see those places, or what was left of them. We were only a mile and a half, and we were on a hill looking in, and we were only a mile and a half from that northern part of Gaza. And it's a clear day, blue skies, and you're talking about buildings that are 3, 4, 5 stories high. You couldn't see anything.
Who are these guys you're with?
So on the left in the green is Issa Amro. Issa is a nonviolent activist in Hebron, which is the largest Palestinian city, also a very important point for the settlers in Israel. Israeli settlers were probably about 100 yards away from where we were. And on my right is a gentleman named Omar Hamadi, who leads an organization over there called Sabeel. So that's just, where was that? That was the old city. Just a selfie on top of a building in the old city.
Old city?
You
what do you mean
really
old
happy
city?
to be there.
That's the old city in Jerusalem. So the old
That's not a green
city.
Screen with a virtual background. That's a real background.
No. One thing about that is being there, and for folks who have been there before, it's empty. It's a ghost town. Shows the real economic consequences of this war
in Jerusalem.
In Jerusalem. So where there should be tourists thronging on the street below me is practically empty.
Right.
I walked up the Via della Rosa, the road that the street that Christ carried his cross along, and there was no one on it. This is on a Sunday morning. There's no one there.
I was kidding, but doesn't it look like a painting?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No
Ryan.
vendors. No vendors.
So the
no
vendors are they're most of the stalls that would sell the tourist stuff were closed. And here I'm in a coffee shop. This is on the Via della Rosa, right? And the gentleman there I had met before, knew him years ago there. He was born in that building. will probably hopefully die there if he's not, cleansed from there, as many Zionists would like to see happen. But, talking to people like this, it's a really dire situation because the economic bleed out that Israel is enduring is, magnitudes greater upon the Palestinians. The Palestinians, an occupied people, of course. Economic strangulation is one of the ways that Israel slowly tries to get them to leave, slowly encourages what the Israelis call voluntary migration. So, of course, if Israel itself is bleeding out, then the Palestinian people are in a real desperate state. Just as one example, every day prior to October 7th of 2023, 200,000 Palestinians would go from the West Bank into Israel proper to work. And now that number is down to about 20,000. There's not supposed to be any going across into Israel, but about 20,000 do go in to fill jobs that the Israelis feel is critical. So you ask that how, and we could go through the numbers for the economics for Israel. It's very dire for them. It's very bad. How are they surviving? Why are they doing okay? And it's because the United States provides a loan guarantee where Israel can issue debt. And even though Israel's credit rating has been downgraded, I think 5 times in the last 16 months by credit rating agencies, Israel is selling 4 times as many bonds as they did previously or prior to October 7, 2023. And why does the bond market allow it? Why are they able to sell like that? Well, because, again, their loans, their debt is guaranteed or backed by the United States of America.
Okay, but selling those bonds, for example, and what you're describing there now, it's very interesting. Obviously, that's not going for the general economy. That just seems like it's going to keep the doors open.
Right. And they have had very bad, latest number I heard was 60,000 Israeli businesses have gone out of business in the last 16 months.
Right.
Now,
Now, Matt, before you go on, because you hit a number of things, and this is coming on in my mind here. Obviously, what you've just alluded to in Israel is the truth that permanent war makes you weak, brings ruin, brings disaster. Of course, nobody hears about that really at all when it comes to Israel. It's obvious when you look at Gaza, but not so much in Israel. But you also were talking about history earlier, and I still feel like while it's very easy to say, well, the United States is, playing these imperial wars using these proxies, that we do have a tradition which is known as the good neighbor policy, which we don't use. And this is something I want to ask you about. There is a tradition in the United States to work with Russia, with China, with South Africa, like Jose was saying, in the American tradition that we used to call the good neighbor policy. So it might not seem possible, but isn't that the case, that there is something embedded in us historically that could participate in a good way to turn the situation around if we chose to?
I don't particularly see that. I've seen America primarily as an extractive enterprise. So whether it was the early, before this continent was settled and conquered by the American government, it was always extractive and then remained to be extractive, right? And then going overseas, of course, our first ventures overseas are in defense of trade, right? The Barbary pirates, in was it Madison's time? I believe, yeah, I think it was Madison's time. But anyway, but even too, you look at where has the United States really cut its teeth overseas in terms of like a major foreign policy arena, and it's in the 1840s when we take part in the Opium Wars. Not a very large part, but you see the United States learn quite a bit from what was euphemistically called the China trade in the way that the Brits ensured it and guaranteed it. And of course, a lot of American fortunes were made in the 19th century in that, China trade, that opium trade.
Well, no, that's true. That's true. But then in 1860, Lincoln sent
Burlingame.
Yeah, that guy to China as our ambassador to kind of like reverse that whole thing. And what was his name? Anson Burlingame.
He has a cool mustache, which I'm trying to grow.
to reverse it. And then it was so much better than what President Tyler had done, that then the Chinese reciprocated and said, well, now you be our ambassador back to the United States. And I believe that was sort of the beginning of working with China around railroads and industrial development.
That's right.
Right. And I mean, certainly, right, that western part of the railroads built by Chinese labor, God knows how many thousands of them died doing it, right? I mean, thousands.
Well, I meant railroads in China, not to mention railroad building.
I thought you meant,
No, I meant in China. Yes, I've read Stephen Ambrose's book on the Transcontinental Railroad, which I find a very good book. He actually says the Chinese were the best because of how they performed there compared to others.
And they had to go through those mountains, right?
They were the only ones who knew how to do it. Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. You know, Matt, can I just respond to you, Matt? You're much smarter and wiser than me, so contradicting you feels very wrong. But I hope you welcome the spirit.
You're going to do it anyway.
Yeah. I think like we can look at our history and say, well, we've done this and that wrong. We've done this and that right. I think we have to fight for something. We have to fight for a real solution, because I think it's either we're going to have some kind of development plan, and if we go Trump's way, it's going to be war. We need to be proposed. We all want Gaza to be rebuilt. I don't think there's anybody who doesn't want that to happen. I don't want it to be handed over to the Israelis. I think that that's horrible. And so what I think should be happening is we should be advocating for our own, you've been on the Friday calls, right, with the International Peace Coalition calls. Yeah. There's a plan that has been endorsed by the Palestinian ambassador to Denmark. His name's Hassassian. I forget his last name. His first name's Hassassian, and he has endorsed the Oasis plan, which is this plan where you take the entire region and you just remodel it over the course of the next 5 to 10 years as an international development effort where the entire world is looking at this region in particular. Oh, wow. He's got the graphic.
Am I good?
You're really good. Yeah, exactly. And so, the idea is that, look, we need power. We need infrastructure in these places. They need basic housing. They need basic infrastructure at this point, because it's all just been demolished. It has to be rebuilt with the people in Gaza and the West Bank, with the help of the entire world. We have to bombard it with aid. We have to bombard it with engineers. The Army Corps of Engineers should be able to go in there, or whatever the equivalent of the Army Corps of Engineers are in other countries, coming in and building up temporary housing while permanent housing is built.
Why don't you describe this a little bit, Jose, what we're looking at, so that...
Well, the idea is that you have a port. It's kind of self-explanatory, but you have a railway that allows you to go from the West Bank to Gaza, and you can go all around, and you can go around Israel. That's a whole other question about the territory. And you're building canals, because part of the problem with Gaza and Israel, by the way, is that both Palestine and Israel, the problem there is that they are both suffering from a dearth of water. They are both underneath the 400 liters or 400 gallons of water a day to be considered a quote unquote developed nation. I think Israel only averages like 220 something per person, and Gaza, of course, even less. So you have to develop that region. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is with international guarantees, with all kinds of people that all don't agree on one thing, except for we have to rebuild and we have to modernize Gaza so that it has the same fighting chance as any other sovereign nation does, because that's how you have a sovereign state.
Are you boys okay with taking a phone call?
Yeah, sure. I was going to say the one thing that was left off that's left off those map are airports. And that's something that the Palestinian people need are airports.
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
I'm going to write that down, actually, because that's a really good point.
You'll hear these arguments about, the Palestinians walked away from peace plans, and Bill Clinton talks about this a lot. So does Hillary Clinton, about supposedly the deal that they have brokered, and the Palestinians walked away from it, which is complete bullshit. That's a false rendering of that story. But anyway, one of the issues was, among many, why it was such a bad deal, was that Palestinians had no control of their border. They had no border entry, right? So no one could go into Palestine without it being controlled by the Israelis. So one of the things you need, of course, then is an airport. And so essentially you need an airport in both Gaza and in the West Bank.
Okay.
All right, let's take a call. Hey, you're on with Matt, Jose, Ryan, and America's Sweetheart. What's on your mind?
Great. Good show tonight, guys. I kind of had a question about your thoughts on the practicality of doing all these construction industrial complex projects, because the U.S. and European Union and these Western countries are really service economies at this point. And so the only people I could foresee even being able to rebuild Gaza, rebuild nuclear power plants, canal networks would be probably the Turks, the Chinese, and the Saudis are the only countries who have that big inbuilt industrial complex that could build large projects like that, or who have built large projects in the past, decade or so. The U.S., I know our NGOs are very centered around regime change, as USAID, is all those events have kind of showed. So what are your thoughts on, what is the practicality of something like this? Is this all just a kind of PR stunt? Thank you, guys.
Matt, you should answer that, and I also want to hear what Jose says about that. But what do you say, Matt?
Well, I was involved with reconstruction by the U.S. government in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the United States should be nowhere near any of that. And I agree with you in terms of the American corporations as well as the NGOs. They just have had the opportunity to do such work over the last couple decades, including in the Balkans, and they have been just spectacular examples of fraud and incompetence. And you're right. Those nations you pointed out, particularly the Chinese, can do that work, and they do that work all the time. One of the things the Americans are really upset about in South America is the Chinese just built a port for the Peruvians, so they probably will be able to do one in Gaza for the Palestinians as well, right? As well as you look at their their Belt and Road Initiative, where they're building infrastructure across the world. Whether that's good or bad, I'm not going to get in that conversation right now, but they're doing it though.
The capability is there. It's a mature capability.
Yeah. Whether they are entirely benevolent or they're insidious and nefarious, another conversation to have. But the thing is, they can do it. Yeah.
Well, but the question about that and what our caller just said is, I don't know if I've heard an answer to this myself on this show yet even. What government has proposed that kind of thing beyond what we just heard from Donald Trump? I mean, okay.
And if they haven't proposed it, who do we think is up for
public.
it?
Yeah.
Who's up for it?
Who's going to assert that?
We've also heard from the Saudis and the Qataris that they're not going to be involved in any rebuilding unless there's a permanent solution. So that they're not going to come in and rebuild things. The way the Saudi ambassador to the UK said it was, we're not going to come in and build something just to have it blown up again in a few years.
That's why I think you need to have security guarantees, like multinational security guarantees, right? You can't just have, because that's the thing. I mean, and I know that this, not to kind of cross this over into Ukraine, but one of the proposed peace plan for Ukraine is that they'll have security guarantees in a demilitarized zone with British and French troops. I don't trust that for a second, right? Because that is like basically putting NATO in a demilitarized zone, right? I might trust it if you had a combination of Chinese soldiers, British soldiers, and some other soldiers, right? And I think the same thing kind of needs to happen in Palestine as well, where if you do want to have these reconstruction programs, well, how do we promote long-term security other than just infrastructure? And I think that there has to be some kind of deal that is higher than the UN, because no one takes the UN seriously anymore.
Do you guys think that whatever type of coalition that might be put together for this could also be used for other projects as well? Is that unnecessarily complicating it, or would that make it more appealing?
I think it would be great, because then you don't stop in that region. Then you can join what the Chinese are doing with the Belt and Road and the BRICS, where they're going to poor nations, they're giving them the infrastructure, they're teaching the people how to be engineers and stuff. And now it's like that's basically the idea. The Chinese have invited every administration since Obama to be a part of the belt of the BRICS. You know, I mean, if you had the US, Russia, China as a part of a coalition and going around the world and building up other nations that are developing, I think that would be a great idea. But then naturally the question is, well, how can we trust that these nations will actually act in a way that will be true to what they said they're going to do? And I think that responsibility is up to the citizenry to maintain that, to keep that going, you know. I mean, I really believe in JFK's words when a month before he was shot, he was at the UN and he told the Soviet Union directly, I want to work with you to get to the moon. That the expedition to the moon and space does not have to be a single nation thing. The Soviets and the United States can walk together on the moon. I think that would be the same idea, basically, where we can develop the world.
Matt, just to jump back to you and to digress a little bit, but Jose mentioned this. This is part of this new plan from Donald Trump on Ukraine, rebuilding it and so forth. But one thing I was thinking about in terms of, you mentioned China, it is the case that places like Mariupol were rebuilt very quickly by the Russians. So if you did have, like what he's saying, what Jose's saying about security guarantees, then the potential to go in there kind of like an Apollo program and just say, okay, we're going to rebuild this place fast.
Right.
Could be done, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, hey,
as opposed to this kind of silliness that we're seeing.
Right. You could even have a situation, you know, you can imagine a situation where you have different countries involved and it's like a competition essentially, right? So
that would appeal to Trump.
Yeah, I mean, like, and then you have that case where Trump has to beat Xi Jinping and Putin because Putin's doing Khan Yunis and Xi Jinping's doing Gaza City and Trump's got Rafah, right? So he's gonna, right? I mean, that type of who's going to build it better. So I mean, you can get.
Well, no, that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, but the idea though of what's being spoken about is this was the purpose of essentially the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, right? And we saw what the reality of that has been since the end of the Second World War. But you know, this idea of having development banks, whether they're by one country or by multinational institutions like BRICS. And I don't know if they have it or they're building it out now. BRICS will have a development bank capability to be an alternative to the World Bank. So, yeah, I mean, certainly there's that. And when you look at it in that sense, the grander sense in the entire world, and if the estimates are $50 billion to rebuild Gaza, well, all of a sudden that doesn't seem too much, right? All of a sudden it doesn't seem, I mean, the question is about the actual work itself. Mm-hmm. Right, the removal of all that rubble, the rebuilding of all that infrastructure, the time it would take to do that, the manpower, on and on and on. But certainly there is that capacity in the world. And what would be, you know, and I know what we're saying here. We're saying this in a position completely removed from reality of what more than likely or will happen with Israel and the United States with regards to the Palestinians. But say that wasn't the case. What a better way for the rest of the world to really give its finger to the old dying American imperial structure than to do something like this in Gaza. Right?
So now you mentioned, and just we have about 4 or 5 minutes left before the top of the hour, and you mentioned that's what the IMF, the World Bank, were supposed to do. I think that's what John F. Kennedy had in mind for U.S. aid. That's what the kind of thing it was supposed to do. And instead, it became a tool for regime change and whatnot. So, you know, it's and maybe you can address this. Trump himself, it's definitely all over the place. It's a wild, messy process. But maybe these institutions need to be shocked again, and then a competition like you're saying. I think that's a great idea. Use their ego to do something good.
Right.
Rebuild these institutions. What do you think about what is happening with USAID from the context we're talking about now?
Yeah, and let's remind the audience that Matt is a former State Department officer, so it's good to get his take on that. It's now being, I guess, dismantled is the word, but it's under the auspices of the State Department now.
I saw a headline, hadn't had a chance to read the article, but saw a headline an hour or two ago from the New York Times saying that only 220 employees out of 10,000 employees are expected to remain on the staff of the USAID, but, you know, at the end of the week. So it is. I worked with the USAID quite closely in both Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as in Washington, D.C. And USAID does need to be dismantled, and it needs to be rebuilt for a lot of the reasons that Ryan just said. It's well documented. USAID, going back to the Kennedy presidency, when it was created, was nothing more than a CIA front very often. At one point in the early 60s, every USAID administrator in Vietnam was a CIA officer. So you have that, so right from the get-go, it was designed that way. It wasn't the case of the CIA taking it over, saying, "Oh, here's a great cover for us. Let's hook ourselves." No, it was designed that way. So it was always designed with the idea of foreign policy, achieving national security goals, regime change, regime protection. It was always there. You have the reality that, as I saw it in Kabul, in Baghdad, in D.C., there were no greater advocates for the continuation of those wars, the sustainment of those wars, for the escalation of those wars, than oftentimes USAID officers. But then you have the other aspects of it too with USAID, where, look, this is a development organization. And the goal of every development organization should be to work itself out of business. I had a friend who a number of years ago was just apoplectic that USAID was celebrating like their 50th anniversary in Morocco. And the whole idea of a development organization celebrating being 50 years someplace, that's and so that goes against the whole way USAID conducts itself. And finally, I'll say there was a joke 20 years ago within the U.S. government, the foreign policy community at least. Maybe it's still said, but what's the most secretive organization in the U.S. government? And you'd expect the response to be the CIA. And no, the response would be USAID. And they were incredibly secretive, some of it because of its role with the CIA, but others because there was a lot of waste, there was a lot of mismanagement, there was a lot of incompetence that went along with the whole idea of, where's your strategy, guys? All you keep doing is sending money to the same corporations, development corporations and NGOs, where they're flying their people business class. They're making $150,000 to $250,000 a year for overseeing the construction of 5 wells someplace.
Hand pump wells too, by the way.
So there's lots of reasons to have torn down and rebuilt USAID. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like those are any of the reasons why this thing is being carried out.
Earlier, I respectfully disagreed when Jose suggested a message coming in from our friend Morgan was an emergency. I don't think it was an emergency, but on the other hand, I want to just check with you, Jose. She was going to perpetrate, if that's the right word, one of those interventions that
Yes.
you enjoy so much. And do we have any information or any video on that or anything?
Well, the reason I freaked out was because the number I got the call from was not from her, but the person with her, who I told explicitly, only call me if there's an emergency. It wasn't an emergency. I thought like if she gets arrested or something, but it's okay.
Who was she going to confront?
Oh, Boris Johnson.
Where was he speaking?
He was speaking at High Point University. Do you know where that is, Matt?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A few hours for me. Yeah. I just checked her Instagram. There is nothing posted on her Instagram yet. So.
Look at you. Wow. Doing intelligence work on the fly.
I was told that she will edit the video, and that there were a lot of MAGA hats in the crowd. Funny enough, I didn't think there would be. Actually, and Matt, she tried to chicken out of it by saying, well, no one knows who he is, right, in America?
Boris Johnson?
Yeah. And I said, no, that's not an excuse. You have to go and do what you know is right to do.
Yeah. If her video was spicy enough, they would be reminded.
Yes. So anyway, I don't have anything to show for it, but hopefully you'll see it on her and my social media a little later.
So do we know? Did she confront him? Do we know if it happened?
She did in fact confront him. I got a text saying she's okay. She did confront him. She was not really rough handled out, but they did escort her out, and people were booing her and yelling at her, and that's always a good thing.
Right.
So.
All right. So I was saying it in a lighthearted way earlier, but Matt, what do you think about Jose's habit of intervening? Have you ever done anything like that?
I don't know. I haven't done anything like that. Not like as in Jose, and I wouldn't be very good at that. That's not my.
So you have a different personality. Yeah.
I have a different personality, and also too, I don't like getting touched. I wouldn't be good at it. You know, you watch Jose,
touched.
like watch when this comes out from Morgan, she's going to be great about not saying I'm going to like fight some security guard someplace. It'd be like, I mean, in a sense, like I would lose my train of thought. I wouldn't be able to do it well. And that's what you see with like Jose and I'm sure Morgan.
Oh, he's a master.
Right?
He's a master.
It's incredible that you guys maintain your composure. You stay on message, right? I mean, it's really impressive. And I think these interventions are necessary. It's a way to break through a wall that otherwise we're not getting through. I just had this conversation today with a friend of mine about distribution. And we can have the greatest, smartest, most eloquent, moral, historically sound voices out there. But if people don't hear it, what good is it? And so our agitation and propaganda that we're conducting, if it's just to the choir, again, what good is it? So you have to go to these places and do exactly what Jose and Morgan are doing. And oftentimes make people uncomfortable. Because how many people sitting there today, or how many people, like when you did the most recent one I know, the Paul Krugman one that you did.
Yeah. Oh, that one was a good one.
How many people in that audience did you flick something in, right? How many people say, you know what, this guy's right, then they start, they
That's a
start
good point.
down that path. So
I think that's part of what makes Trump so valuable, and we can agree or disagree as to whether we like this or that. But I think that his showmanship in general is a plus because it gets people engaged. I lived in Los Angeles for many years after living in New York for 10 years, and like everybody who lives in who moves to Los Angeles from New York, it was always like comparing the two cities. And I remember, I don't know who was it. I wish I remembered because I would like to credit them for it. But I remember whoever was the mayor of Los Angeles at the time was going through a divorce. Not that that's so important to the electorate, but nobody even knew it. And this person whose name I can't remember made the point that if this was in New York, it would be in the tabloids, the New York Post, the Daily News. And that is not in and of itself important, but it gets people paying attention to politics in general. Mm-hmm. And in LA, nobody even knows anything that's going on in city government. So this sort of showmanship is valuable.
Right. And getting an audience that you're not going to get, or getting in front of people who wouldn't normally hear what you're saying. When I was at Standing Rock in 2016, Standing Rock, North Dakota, big pipeline protest there. I was there in early October. And so was Shailene Woodley, the actress. And when we were getting arrested at the pipeline, she was streaming it on Facebook. And then the sheriff's department arrests her. And we actually got fingerprinted together. It's kind of cool that that's the person I got fingerprinted with, right? And she was so nice, it was unbelievable. But anyway, but how stupid that was. She may have had 20,000 people watching her Facebook stream or however many. But the reality is that they arrested this really famous actress, put her in an orange jumpsuit and everything else. And then what happens next week? She's on the cover of like People magazine, right? And so now you have all these people who would never have paid attention, never known about it, knowing, hey, she got arrested? I mean, what was this about? Oh, there's a pipeline protest. Oh my God, we're doing this to the Native Americans again, on and on and on. So it's that idea of like, how do you do these actions that get people to notice you, but more importantly, get them to start thinking about this as well.
Yeah, especially the way Jose does it, because he says very intelligent things. He's actually providing information as opposed to your standard run-of-the-mill heckler who just yells out some nonsense.
He's not taking off his shirt, showing his breast, throwing a bucket of paint. It's actually constructive.
We don't want to see that cleavage, the Jose Vega cleavage.
I think the thing we get to though is that we have to work on all fronts, right? We have to do it asymmetrically, right? So it's there's kind of two things that have always guided me on this, and I've shared this with Jose.
Oh God, Jesus Christ!
See, this gets attention.
There's some asymmetric warfare right there.
Yeah, that totally threw me off. But anyway, the two things I've always kind of one is don't die on a small cross, right? But the other is, and I know that I knew a guy who worked on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee when Joe Biden was the chair of that, And he said that was Biden's advice, his guidance all the time. Don't die on a small cross. But then another thing that's always impacted me for longer than that, as we go back 20 some odd years, is a South Park episode where the parents in the school district are all upset about something with the school. And so to protest and to try and change the school's mind, they strap themselves into catapults and they launch themselves against the brick walls of the school. Right. So that's always been my kind of thing, is like, don't die on a small cross. Don't launch yourself in a catapult against a brick wall, but find things that are are relevant to what your resources are. Right. So don't waste time on something. Don't waste time, energy, manpower, money on things that are way too far out. Right. And then the other would be, don't launch yourself against that brick wall. So how do you fight these guys asymmetrically? And one of the things is then, of course, is like what Jose does with these interventions, is he's able to like have that presence, get that moment in time. He also puts those people in an awkward position because, as you say, what Jose's saying is very intelligent, and now is this guy going to respond to what's being said, or is he just going to clam up and appear like a coward? And again, now that gets the people in the audience thinking, well, hey, how come this guy's not addressing that? With the Krugman thing, how come he's not talking about rebuilding the Bronx? Yeah, the Bronx is in really bad shape. Why hasn't Krugman addressed that about what we're going to do about this country?
He's an economist, right?
He's thinking that way.
To your point, see, this is a funny thing, because I was commenting in, I won't say what social media it was, but they were just complaining about Donald Trump with a certain derangement syndrome. I said, how is it that you are now complaining about the state of the economy now that Trump is president? Where were you, not just the last 4 years, where were you the last 30 years? Because your economy doesn't break down in 4 years. It takes decades for your economy to fall apart. So that's one of the things that I think about from that standpoint, that everybody's ready to point the finger and say, this guy is doing something that's fucked up and no good, but they're not ready to say, this is what he should do. Okay, fine. I don't like what Trump's doing on Gaza. This is an idea, which I like that we've discussed some here today, is the kind of things that he could do, because, he's taken apart USAID. You laid out a number of things that are very reasonable about why that is. Now, how do you get it back on track? I mean, we haven't quite tied the bow on that topic yet. But that
let me present to you guys what I think is the lowest form of protesting, and see if you agree or not. What's going on, Matt?
Oh, I have on my wall here, because we're talking about the interventions and the protest thing. This is Ray McGovern, former CIA analyst. This is his bolo that the United States State Department diplomatic security put out when he intervened on Hillary Clinton back.
I remember that.
Right, exactly.
They beat him up, kind of.
And everything else. His arms are all black and blue.
When was that?
Ray didn't even speak. Ray just stood there silently.
Right.
So you have the guy who was the presidential daily briefer for the CIA for George H.W. Bush, right? And this old man standing there silently and getting dragged off by diplomatic security as Hillary Clinton talks about whatever she was, you can imagine what she was talking about. So, I mean, Jose's following a great line.
Great tradition, That's another example of really laudable type of protest.
My point is,
but let me tell you the opposite, what I think is the lowest form, because it's in the news right now, and I want to see if you guys agree, are these maniacs in Los Angeles who were blocking traffic, which I think is absolutely ridiculous, because they're inconveniencing and annoying innocent people that aren't even tied to whatever they're protesting. Do you guys agree that that's a terrible form of protest?
Yeah, because
Jose, you want to go? I've been talking a lot.
I as much as I hate contradicting Matt, I can't contradict America's sweetheart.
Well, you can. It's okay. I mean,
look, I think it's annoying and inconvenient. Yes, especially when it's done for dumb things like, stop meat eaters or something, or not that, being vegan is. I think.
Well, isn't this a dumb reason? I mean, it's not even known. They're not making any demand that if Matt will end the protest. They're just.
Are they just sitting in the road?
They're just blocking traffic. There's no specific demand.
Well, because I think about when here in New York, Jewish Voice for Peace shut down Grand Central Station. And like I was on the fringes of that. Like literally, I was in the fringes of that. They had just locked the doors before I could get in, and I was recording like grannies getting arrested and stuff. And then I was recording people just getting arrested, coming in and out, right? And that felt like, oh wow, like there is a real resistance to the U.S. aid to Israel bombing, what's happening in Gaza, and I felt like that really set the tone and environment for the next few months after that. When was that? That was like November or December of 2023, right? Yeah, I mean, like that to me, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. You got to shut everything down if your country is committing and aiding a genocide,
So you're saying you agree or disagree with me? I don't understand.
I don't know either.
I agree with Jose in the sense it's got to be strategic, right?
Yeah.
And I don't agree with shutting down the roads because that leaves you open. You're vulnerable then to the ambulance couldn't get through, and et cetera, et cetera. And I saw an interview on British television where climate change activists had shut down a road, and on like their largest morning program, they had someone on to defend it, and the host just skewered this person. Right. So, it's got to be strategic. It's got to be robust. Right. And it's got to be, the communication has to be there ahead of time so that when people show up at Grand Central Station and they can't get home, they know it's about this. Right. And then people watching are saying, well, all it is that someone got home 2 hours late. Nobody was stuck in an ambulance. Right. I mean, so I think if it's done in a smart, focused, strategic way, it can be very powerful. But if it's just done kind of leaving you open to the attacks of what's you can clearly see coming, then no, I think it could actually be detrimental.
Yeah, I mean this whole resistance thing, it's like it's very vague. They're not like focusing on any one issue. They're just unhappy with the Trump administration.
Again, where were they for the last 4 years? Because if they're upset about things for the country, they're upset about the federal government. Exactly, Anya Parampil. She's right. Where were they when Blinken was ordering these policies? He was actually doing those things. I mean, Matt, was Blinken not complicit in genocidal policies under the Biden administration?
Tony Blinken? You mean the foreign minister for the state of Israel? That's Tony Blinken. Yeah.
Who plays guitar for Zelensky in Ukraine?
I did a show and we talked about
versatile
secretaries of state, and they gave me we were talking ahead of time, and I knew that they were gonna. We never even got into it actually, but they wanted to go through in the last 25 years or since the Cold War, who are the best and worst secretaries of state, And best was pretty hard. It's pretty hard to think about. Worst, no question. Even Condi Rice. When you're looking at secretaries of state, and Rex Tillerson doesn't seem like a bad one. That tells you how bad it is. But the reality is, when you're writing down who's the worst, Tony Blinken. I mean, by far, that man had done more damage to the U.S. as well as the international order than anyone could have thought possible. He's destroyed the nation of Ukraine, caused the deaths and suffering of millions. And of course, with his genocide in Gaza, he was the lead proponent of it. He did everything except actually pull the trigger himself with regards to that genocide. So, yeah, that's how I feel about Tony Blinken. And, I've got some other things. I was drinking wine. Maybe I'd say it. But
all right.
Yes.
Next time, let's see if you'll make one of the rare occasions you imbibe the next time. All right. Well, another great show. Thank you all so very much. Enjoyed chatting with you, and thanks to our beloved audience. We'll be back next week at the usual time, Thursday, 7 p.m. And please join us tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time for Ask the Inspector with our favorite weapons inspector, Scott Ritter. Take care, everybody.
Bye.